Super sweet because we have such an awesome community. We have a couple that we can give away tonight. Thanks to Natalie. Thank you. And all the organizers also. Yeah, we have a couple tonight, so if you don't have a ticket, we're going to make you like duke it out. And someone will walk away with a ticket. Awesome. And a bruise. And a bruise, yeah. Just one walk? Just one, at least. Yeah. So yeah, definitely, if you haven't been to a WordCamp before, you should go, because it's like this, but a full day, and your brain will melt of WordPress gooiness.
And more food.
And more food, yeah. And food and all sorts of rad things, which maybe now they won't talk about, and whoever's going to talk about it.
I didn't see a golf tournament.
Yeah, I know. Right?
Well, it's not working.
Right?
Yeah.
Just say it.
Yeah, Allie's a different crowd.
Yeah. No, but super excited. I hope all of you will be there. Let's see. Other announcements. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Anybody else have any announcements? I'm trying to scramble to go with one. No. Anything exciting going on? Nothing. Yes.
I did my first custom theme with SAS.
Yes.
Using SAS based on Jeffrey, right?
Correct.
Jeffrey's presentation. It was like a month ago? 2 months ago?
Yeah.
So I'm pretty stoked on that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That'd be cool.
Congratulations, man.
Yeah. If you could show it off, that'd be all right.
I'd probably get picked apart, but yeah.
No, sure. Yeah, no, but I think it's exciting to use something you hear and see it up on screen too.
Yeah.
So if you want to, I'm not going to force you to, but if you want to, definitely come up and give us a little tour. Okay, so the topics that we had, and just to get your mind working a little bit, were adaptive images. So we talked about responsive being a thing, right? But occasionally you might want to have a situation where you're actually serving the right-sized images from your server rather than waiting to the client side and doing downloads and things like that. So there are a couple options here and a couple downsides that we can talk through. But if you have any if you have any experience in the area, I'll definitely talk through that tonight. We have the fabulous Dave Jesh, the wizard, who's going to be showing us all about the nav walker class and cool things you can do with it. We did talk about, someone brought up SVG, using that on sites versus if there's libraries out there, JavaScript libraries to draw, or why we want to use those, or maybe icon fonts, things like that. If you have experience with that, we'll talk about that. So we talked about security. We always talk about security, it seems like, but one of the specific things that was brought up was maybe obscuring the admin by moving the admin folder. And it looks like there's an iThemes plugin that does something like it, and we could talk. I think we talk about a different way to do that as well. So if we can get through that, we'll do that. And we have like an open session for any type of text manipulation tools that you guys use. Maybe get into some command line-y stuff if we have a chance, and just general questions around that. If there's anything that we want to add to this list, that's great. Like I said, we're a little freeform tonight in that we have a speaker, and I doubt he's going to speak for 2 hours. Maybe we push him. But
you don't want to listen to me for 2 hours.
Wow, that's where you're wrong. But if we have other topics, things that you're working up against that you're having problems with. Oh, I was going to talk about Grunt for, what's that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, so Suzette posted something on the Facebook group about using Grunt for SAS and JavaScript and all the other things you can do with it. So I'm going to show off some stuff that we've sort of pieced together from working with it. And give that a shot. So if you have any other ideas, definitely keep them on your brain so at the end when we have time left over, then we can talk about it. Any questions? You guys got your wizard hat on? All right, so I'm going to invite Dave up here to present on the nav walker class. If you don't know what it's about, you're going to. Right, Dave?
Yeah.
I'm going to hit the light. There's going to be code on the screen, so it might be easier to see that.
It's coming from the sun.
We can't rotate it.
All right. We'll just shut off the sun.
We'll just wait the sun. Wait for half an hour.
Yeah. All right. So, nav walkers. Who's heard of nav walkers? Who knows what they are? Okay. Who's used them? A couple. Who hasn't? Who hasn't used them because they're afraid? Yeah. Okay.
Why try?
Okay, well, we're going to try to get through this. It is going to be geeky. There will be code on the screen, but I'll try to walk through it and reveal this stuff in small chunks so that it's hopefully easy to follow along. If you have any questions, because it is going to be kind of technical, stop me and we'll try to explain things and get you so that you can understand what's happening. Okay, so first thing, we need a menu, right? We've got to walk through a menu, so we need a menu to work with. Up here I have the final menu that's been modified with the nav walker, but it starts out looking something like this. I put it in kind of an outline form so you can get an idea for what parts are there. So we can start thinking about how we might want to massage this data with the nav walker. So this gives us a couple things we can work with. And what are we going to do with our nav walker? So we're going to do 5 different things. We're going to add a custom class to one of our drop-down menus. That's going to be this search engine menu right here. We're going to add a custom class to an element within that menu. We're going to adjust the title attribute on the elements within that menu. And we're going to add custom classes to some other menus so that we can target those with CSS and make them look different, all with CSS. And then we're going to actually remove an item from the menu because we don't want to have a logout menu if you're not logged out. I'm sorry, if you are logged out. So there's actually a logout menu or item in the menu here, but it's not showing up on the screen. And I'll show you how I did that too. So we start out by building a class. Unfortunately, the only way to do a nav walker is by doing object-oriented code. So if you don't have a whole lot of experience with object-oriented code, your head's going to explode. But you might be able to use this as an example and kind of adapt it and make it do what you want. So the walker nav menu class itself has basically 4 methods within it that it uses when it's walking through a menu. And each of those methods is called at a different point in time. Okay? You have a start level and an end level. Those methods are called essentially on the unordered list element. So there's an unordered list to contain your entire menu, and if you have submenus, you have more unordered lists within that. So each time you start with an unordered list, you're going to have that start level method called. You with me so far? So what does that do? The first 2 lines here that are commented out, these are the 2 lines of code that are in the walker nav menu classes version of this method. This is all that it does. We want to do a little bit of something different here. We want to add a class to this element before it goes out to the HTML content, right? So we're essentially going to do the same thing, but if the title of the menu item says search engines, we want to add another class that's going to be added to that UL element, right? Because we have this the search engine menu with submenu items in it. So this is how we do that. I just build a class, and it has in it the main class that we want to have everybody, all those elements are going to have by default. And then only if the title of the current menu item, and I save that with a class property. So if the title for the current menu item is search engines, we're going to add another class to that. And then these two lines of code are essentially the same as these two lines of code. But I'm importing out that array with spaces in between it, so we have all of our class names inside that class attribute. Are you with me? Easy so far?
So the start level is like the top level of the menu, right?
Right. The UL element at the beginning of your whole menu, that's when this gets called.
Okay.
And this other parameter here, depth, that tells you how many ULs deep you are. So when you're on that UL within the LI within the UL, you're 2 levels deep. And so that depth value is going to be changing. And this line of code here is just indenting that with some tabs. You don't really need to do that, but if you want your HTML output to look pretty, they do that. The end level method is called at the end of that UL. So when it gets closed, you call the end level method. And one thing that you might think is a little bit weird is this right here. Parent, end level. What does that parent do? Parent is it's a keyword that PHP classes use. And what it means is use the parent class's version of this method. Just call that whatever it is. So what I'm doing here is I'm clearing out a value that I've set previously. I'll explain that when I get to it. This is a little bit of state information. I want to know if I'm in the search engine menu, that search engine's menu. So I save that state so that later when that end level method is called, I clear it out. Because I want to keep that information for a certain period of time. When I'm done with that UL, I'm done with that piece, I don't need to clear it out. So that's the only thing I need to do. So rather than rewriting and re-implementing the entire end level method from the parent class, I just call it. You can think of this as kind of the same mechanism that you use in child classes, right? If you have a child, not child classes, I'm sorry, child themes. So if you have a child theme and you have a custom page template in that child theme, that page template is going to be called and not the page template from the parent theme, right? All familiar with that concept? When you're subclassing a Walker nav menu class, or any class, if you override that, it's like putting your page template into your child theme. It's going to use that instead of the method from the parent class. So it's the same kind of a concept. Child class, child theme, using the same named template or a method, it's the same kind of concept. Make sense so far? Okay, so now is where we're going to get fun. This one's a little bit more complicated. The start element is called for each LI element for that menu. So every single LI in your menu, you're going to get a call to this method for that. This output parameter is the HTML content that the walker is building up. This is actually going to contain the entire HTML blob that makes up your menu as it's being built. And this funky little ampersand in front of it, what that does is it tells that function that whatever modifications you make to that value, those are going to be sent back to the caller. That's called passing a value by, you can pass a value in one of two ways, by reference or by value. If it's by value, you're just putting that information into that method. If it's by reference, you're putting it in, but you will also get it out. And the ampersand does that. You're passing it by reference so the caller can get that output data that you're constructing back out of that function, that method. So up here, where we're checking the last item, that needs to be set somewhere. So we're doing that here. We're setting it. Every time we go into the start element, we save the item. That's the data that is going to be rendered into an LI element. That's the item parameter. We save that so we can reference it later. It's a little bit more state information that we're going to need later. And that's where it's used back here. So it's kind of a cart before the horse. You need both. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around how all this works. But I'm just saving it here so that I have access to it up here. Okay? The next thing, if you remember our list of items we're going to do up here. These numbers here correspond to these comments in the code here. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a class called drop-down menu to the search engine menu. So if the title from that item, remember item is the information about that item in the menu. If the title of that is search engine, we're going to save the fact that we're doing a search engine menu. And we're going to add this to our list of classes that we're going to keep track of for this menu. So that classes array is going to be all the classes that are going to be added to this LI element that's being output onto the page, right? So that's all we need to do, to add a new class, CSS class, to the LI element in the menu. Okay, next step is to add a class, same kind of idea, to the Google link within the menu. So it's the same idea. We check to see if the title is Google, and we add a different class so that we can address that menu separately. Here we're going to be adjusting the title attribute. The title is the text that's going to be shown in the menu, the title element of that item property, item instance. The attribute title, that's the title attribute. So when you're editing the menu in your WordPress admin, you can put in the name that's going to be shown on the page, you can put in the link, you can put in the title. That's where it's getting it from. And you can modify that. If you don't want to see any titles in your menu, this is how you can get rid of it. You can just set that to an empty string. Then you don't get titles.
Where's,
Yeah.
where is the SE menu? Where is that defined? Like, how does it know that that's the search engine menu? Is that there?
It's declared as a class property here.
Oh, I see. So that's why you're able to
Right.
dig into it.
And then once I notice that the search engine menu is the title, I set it to true here.
Yeah, okay.
So that's how I remember. It's just a note I make to myself within the class, so I can use that information later. That's the state information.
That makes sense. Okay. And you have it on the top versus being below it through.
On top, what do you mean?
You do it. You do it first, right?
You mean declaring it up here?
No, number one, right? You talk
Oh,
about that one first.
yeah.
You just put it somewhere else.
Yeah, because otherwise it's not going to be
Otherwise
set
that
here.
one's checked. I
Yeah.
like that. That's cool.
Right. Okay? You with me so far? Anybody else? Anyone else have questions? All right, we're going to keep slogging through this. Next, we're going to add a custom class to each item in the menu for our social network menu. So what I do here is I get just the domain name from that URL. So if it's twitter.com/something, this piece of code here, parse URL, that's a standard PHP function that will parse a URL. And I'm telling it that I want to get just the host name out of that URL. So then I can compare that in my switch statement here and say that if it's Facebook, I want to add an icon for a Facebook. I want to add that to the classes for this menu. Same thing for Twitter. This way I don't have to build something that's unique to the entire title or the entire URL. I can use just the domain name. Okay? We're going to do a couple of other things here, just to show off what we can do, how much we can manipulate within this menu. This first one is a little bit strange. The theme I'm using has a bunch of importance on it. So I couldn't use CSS to say, I want this to have a little bit of padding so that my icon will show up, because there are too many importance within the theme. So you probably won't have to do something this ugly. I'm just moving it over with some spaces. You shouldn't have to do this, but it's just because I'm working with a theme that has too many importance in it. Next, I want to set a target equals blank, so that when you click on that Twitter link, it opens in a new tab. So this is how you would do that. XFN, I have no idea why they call it this, but this is how you do a rel equals no follow on that anchor link, right? So you can have an XFN, set that to follow or no follow, and it'll put that appropriate attribute onto the LI element as you're building it. And then we're going to take whatever title is defined in the WordPress menu, and we're going to prefix it with social networking, just to do some additional manipulation of the title, do it a little bit different this time, so we can see what's going on. Okay, so that's all we're doing there. We're modifying the classes here. We're setting up target blanks and rel no follows, and we're modifying the title attribute as well. And lastly, we wanted to remove the logout menu if you're logged out already. So there's no sense having a logout item in your menu if you are logged out, right? Only if you're logged in, provide that. So this is how we can do that. It's a little bit tricky. First, I set this thing to true. We might have other conditions that make us want to not render this menu element onto the page. But here I'm just checking to see if the title is logout and if you're not logged in. So if both those are true, we're going to say call parent false. And then immediately following, we decide whether or not we want to call the parent. So all that's doing is saying if that was the logout menu and you're already logged out, don't display the logout menu item. If it isn't, then we want to call the parent's start element. Now, if you go and look in the WordPress core code and find the Walker nav menu class and you look at this, it's a long piece of code. We don't want to be re-implementing that. We don't want to have to re-implement that when and if WordPress changes. We always want to just call that parent menu class whenever we can, because that makes us have to do less work and things are more compatible later. Okay? And then we do a similar trick on the end element method. That's called for the closing li tag within the HTML. Same thing, we're checking to see if the menu was log out, and we don't want to have that closed li element output onto the page if you didn't have the open li element, right? Otherwise you just have closed li's and your menu is going to get messed up. So that's the entire nav walker. That's all that manipulation of the titles, CSS classes, setting rel no follows, all of that is done just in those 5 steps.
Can you go back
Sure.
quick on, if you have an LI for a top level menu and then you have like a sub menu, where was that in the code? I know it's somewhere in here. Like a UL embedding, because that wouldn't be a...
That's going to get, the UL's called the start level.
Okay, I got it.
So one of those is called for every start level.
For every, yeah, UL, so
UL,
it's a set,
right, UL equals start level,
yeah. And
LI equals start element.
sorry,
Okay? Got it? All right, so there's our walker. It does a bunch of stuff. How do we use that walker? That's the easy part. That's all you got to do. So we create an instance of our custom menu walker class, and we set up the arguments. Walker menu is the name of the menu that I created within the WordPress menu editor. And then you tell it to, for the walker, I want to use this instance that I just created up here. And then we call WP nav menu just like you would any other thing. Now, one thing to note, this arguments array, you'll see this parameter to your end element and your start element. That array that you pass into WP nav menu is also passed into each of these methods within your class. So if you want to, you could create some of your own settings that your walker will recognize. So I could have done this differently by saying, okay, social media, I could have my social networking classes recognize a different way based on the parameters to that argument.
you could add more elements into the argument.
You can make it a lot more flexible so that you can change, you can write one custom walker and then change its behavior based on those parameters that you're passing. So you wouldn't have to keep writing new walkers.
Inheritance.
Just passing an array of elements and data. The inheritance is the class that we've built here, the custom menu walker class. Right here, we're extending that walker nav menu. That gives us the inheritance. And then we know the names of our functions, the methods within that class, because they're documented within the walker nav menu. And I've got links down here. If you want to experiment and read a little bit more, there's links to the WP nav menu function. There's that codex page, and the walker nav menu class, there's that page. So what does all that do? What does it look like when you're done here? So we changed this class. This is gray. You'll notice the search engines, the background is gray. That was targeted with one class. The Google menu item was targeted with another class, so I just made it yellow. And the social networks have icons in front of them. I just set a background image with those custom classes, and then move that over with that ugly non-blank spaces, so you wouldn't have the text walking on top of your icon. But you should do that with CSS, that would be better.
Question?
Yes, sir.
Instead of doing logic based off the title or the menu name, do you have other options for using your logic? I mean, because the menu name could conceivably change.
Sure.
If there's a change to the menu name, then you've got to go into code and change it. Can you base your logic off if you maybe find an action or something like it, or it's in the category or something?
Sure. You could send the item through a filter, and then some other part of the code could do an add filter on that same named filter, and then it would make its determination as to whether or not this is that menu you want to recognize.
What about adding a custom class inside your nav thing? Instead of checking for search engines as the title, you can see if the class is that.
Well, we're changing the class. It by default has only one class on that UL element, and that's called submenu.
But if you didn't want to like hard code search engines as the title, you wanted it to apply to, you wanted the user to be able to control when those classes are added. I'm trying to think of ways to make it more dynamic.
Some other field in the nav admin menu that
Yes, I was trying
that
to
your users have.
I mean, there's the custom class. I can't think of.
You could use the title attribute when you're editing the menu. Put something in the title attribute, and then search for that @title property rather than the name or the link that it's going to. Inside that menu editor, you've got basically three things that you can control: the text, the text content of the menu that's going to be menu item that's going to be shown, and the link that it links to, and the title attribute. But there is one other way you might try doing it. The name can change, that's true, but that item parameter that's sent into this is actually a WP post object. And it's got a few things added to it. So down here I kind of dumped what that looks like. So here's the ID of that. Here's some create times, here's the title. You have access to all this information. So you might be able to use some of this information to key in on the menu that you want to change. There's basically the name and the URL that it's pointing to, and the post ID, some other things. And then these are added by the walker mechanism itself. They're not part of the normal post object, but they're added by the walker. So I put kind of a space here so you can tell where it cuts off. And these are the classes that the walker automatically adds to this list item. And this is what you're adding more classes to. So there's that XFN again. That's your follow, no follow thing.
XHTML Friends Network.
Thank you. I don't know what that TLA was.
So again, what file are you putting this into? This would be in your custom themes area, and it would be...
You can put it in any piece of code that's going to get loaded before the point in time that you want to use that WP nav menu function. Or you could actually include it right before you call that. You can do a get template part or something. You can add it to your functions PHP. You can put it in a plugin. And then in your theme say, okay, does this class exist? If so, create an instance of it and add that as the walker to the menu arguments. So there's a few different ways you can get that code into your theme or your plugin. It all depends on what exactly you need it to do, your situation. So I can't really tell you. But yeah, most people would just add this to your functions PHP because it's your theme that's going to be outputting that menu, but you might have a menu that's being created in a widget or something. So you might, I've done widgets that have walkers built into them because they need to display a menu, but a modified menu. So I did
You
it
have
that way.
to modify the template file when you call to WP nav to switch the walker.
I'm sorry, say again?
You do have to still edit, you have to add your custom walker function into functions.php, but you
Yeah.
still have to go into the template where the header PHP is where WP nav gets called usually, and still change that arg so that the walker
Right.
function gets swapped out.
If you're going to use that class in more than one place, then yeah, probably adding it to functions PHP is easiest. When I built this page on my website, I actually made a custom theme template for this, and I added the walker class to that theme template. As long as that code is defined before you create an instance of that class, you're good. I'm only ever going to use this code on this one template page for this one post, so I decided to do it that way because it doesn't need to be in my functions PHP for every other page on the site. So it's completely up to you on where you put it. It just has to be defined, declare that class before you try to make an instance of it. That makes sense? So I know this is a little bit geeky and lots of code here. Are there any questions on how this stuff works? Any other things we can talk about on this?
Are there any other ways you can do, like, similar to what you're doing without having to actually use the walker class, like actions, filters, things like that?
While I was building this, I was thinking that you could build a walker that calls apply filters for each of the methods, right? So a start element would call that, would do an apply filters with a hook name or filter name, and then the rest of your code could just do an add filter and not have to be object oriented. The walker nav class is object oriented, so really the only way to do this is with some object oriented code. Another really ugly way to do that is to, when you're doing your output buffer, when you're calling WP nav menu, you can tell it echo equals 0 as one of the options, and instead of outputting the menu, it'll return it to you as a string. And then you can manipulate that string with XML parsers or whatever. That's really ugly. It's actually a lot easier to write the class and do a walker than to modify that menu after the fact.
I could have sworn I'm seeing a filter or whatever, an action for something level.
There might be in the code implementation of the main walker class, there might be a couple of filters in there.
There's a way to do it with CSS, what you did here, but there's something more you can do with the walker class.
Yeah.
When I got stuck with the walker just because of information, I ended up writing a jQuery, which was sloppy, but
Yeah. Yeah, that's another way to do
I
it.
got frustrated because there was so much code. But now I'm going to try it and see.
Yeah.
Be a purist.
Yeah, the trickiest part is if you want to modify a UL within that LI, so that submenu, you have to save that state information. And each time that start element is called, it's like writing a little piece of information onto a 3x5 card and passing it to you, and then you throw it away when you're done with that method call. There's no state information built into the nav walkers by default. So by me saving that state information with a couple of class properties, I get that 3x5 card and I can save that information for later, make a note of it, and then later on make use of that information and do something a little bit different. So it takes a little bit of thinking and planning to set that up. Most people probably wouldn't do that. I don't know. It's not very straightforward. But this is a way to do it. It's maybe not the best way to do it or the easiest to understand, but it's certainly a way to do it. And you've got complete control over the output of that. You're either going to call the parent method to have it output that information, or you can construct that all yourself. So you do have absolute control on every single part of that menu that's being constructed by using a walker, instead of modifying it in JavaScript after the fact.
Okay. I have another question. In the custom walker,
Mhm.
do you have to write code for all 4 of the methods, or can you just leave it out and it'll automatically inherit the parent?
Right. Just like your child theme, if you don't have a custom page template in your child theme, it'll use the page template from your parent theme.
Okay, cool.
If you don't write a method in your child class, it uses that method from the parent class. Easy?
I might have to go and study up here, but yeah, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
I just made a mind-blowing discovery, at least to me.
Uh-oh.
So,
Spill it.
check this out.
Spill it.
It could change your life. Well, first of all, I've used the Mini Walker myself many times for the same stuff you're using for hiding stuff, or adding classes.
Right, they're fun.
I've also done it where I don't need a menu with like UL and LI tags, but it's like a select an option list that drops down.
Yeah.
Really good for that. So I just discovered that if you are logged into a WordPress site, you go to the menu, there's an option in there. I don't know when this showed up. Must have been pretty recent. If you open up your screen options in there, and it has an advanced menu properties, one of those properties is extra CSS classes.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, and is that on the LI elements, or can you do that on the UL
I think it's
elements?
just on the LI elements,
Yeah.
because it's per entry in your menu.
Right.
But I would be curious to see if you're doing sub-menu stuff in there, if it applies
Yeah.
to UL. Probably not, probably just on the LI.
Probably not.
But-
Because when Maury posted this idea, that had this question, she sent me a link to a Stack Exchange article, which was essentially, how do I add a custom class to the UL?
Mm-hmm. You can still need to use the walker for that.
Right. They had an implementation for that, but it wasn't really clean. And so I did that here. That was my step 1,
Mm-hmm.
doing that. But yeah, if there are add custom classes to the menu editor, that's probably easier than doing a walker if that's all you need.
If that's all you need, so like the Twitter icon, that stuff would totally take care of that, or even
Sure.
as a way to say, like, here's your unique identifier. So you can change the title, you can change the link, but the class is the same, you can target that too.
That's true. If that class is going to be added to this list of classes, then you could say, if your custom class is within that array, use the PHP in array function to find out if that custom class is already in that list, and then do something special with that. So that would be an easier way to do it. Yeah.
Can we see the markup in the DOM Explorer? For the that menu?
Sure, Command Alt I.
Thank you, I was going to ask. So for this one, Command,
Alt I.
okay, dumb question, where's the Alt?
Alt is got like a
Font option?
Yeah.
Or this one?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. But can I get it on just this
Control
one?
click. Yeah, control click.
Control?
Control click. Yeah.
That part I need. Okay,
So we got classes on the LI,
Yeah.
and we got classes.
this is
on
that drop-down menu that we added. That's on the LI. The UL had my custom submenu class added to it.
So that's where I had to use the walkers, because you can't put it.
Right, you can't target the ULs with that custom menu options thing. You can only target the LIs.
Yeah, that's where I got stuck, and that's when I had to go and explore
Right.
those walker bits.
Right.
Because Bootstrap wants you to put a class under UL, so I was just like,
Yeah, okay, but I like that, I did not know that, thank you. That would help in trying to identify specific items for targeting with other things within the walker.
For sure, and in certain situations too, you could say, and that will help with the bootstrap thing, and then I've got to do stuff with like foundation bootstrap too. But hence my knowledge of the walkers. But you could do like a custom LI here, and you could do a sub menu under that, and you could target the UL inside of that LI.
Sure.
With
Yeah, you can do that in pure CSS.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
you can see most of the way there.
Yeah. Okay, that's good, thanks. I did not know that. That's cool stuff. Any other questions? Or are we done with walkers?
No, we just started.
Just starting? You want some more classes? I don't know what else to do with it. There is something I've done with walkers before, and that is run through translations so that I can have one menu defined in English, and I set up some translation strings for different languages, and I have one menu defined in the entire site, and it's being displayed in Spanish and French and Portuguese or English. So that's kind of cool. I did that by just translating each of the menu titles and things within the walker, and that worked really well. So I don't have to manipulate 5 different menus and decide the language and do that. That would have been a lot of work.
Yeah, I've done one where you have the main menu at the top, and in the sidebar you have just the sidebar, just the sublinks, the section you're on. So it goes through the main menu and only outputs all the submenus for the current item that you're in.
That's cool.
But we don't have to manage all the different submenus for the page.
Yeah, and then edit 2 separate menus. No, that's crazy. That's asking your site users to do too much work. Yeah, it's easier to take an hour and write some code than to train some users on how to manage multiple sets of menus sometimes. Anything else? Are we good with the walkers now?
Thank you, Dave, I really appreciate it.
Okay.
It's very helpful.
Good.
I was expecting more zombies in here.
No zombies. Well, I don't know, someone in the audience might be a zombie.
Okay. Okay, so the next thing that I have on my list, let's see, is the grunt stuff. Does everybody know what grunt is? Anybody not know what it is? Okay, good. All right. So grunt is one of these fancy new tools that makes you happy by automating your workflow. So things like when you're working with Sass or you're working with JavaScript, things like that. Grunt can help you automatically, if you will, recompile all your scripts, check for syntax errors, do amazing things, and it will do it, in a single line of code rather than having to go over to this JavaScript compiler and compile it in JavaScript, go over to the CSS minifier and do all that, grab all the Sass and compile it and all that stuff. So Grunt is basically just it runs off of Node.js. And it runs on it doesn't run on a web server. It's more of just something that you would have installed on your machine that compiles things, that doesn't, it's not something you would include in your website to make things fancy or anything like that. So it runs tasks for you. As a developer, you can set up any number of tasks. They have a whole series of plugins. I mean, these are all like contributed by the community, all sorts of things like that. But they do things that you might do over and over and over when you're developing stuff. So just looking at the top of this stuff, the top of the list here, JS hint is something that if you're writing a lot of JavaScript, you might be familiar with. It basically checks your syntax and stuff before you upload it and realize you broke your entire website. There's Uglify, changes and compresses all your code, so it's basically like packing any sort of JavaScript to make it smaller. They have concat, which takes multiple files, throws them all together into a single file, so you have less requests going out, things like that, CSS min, all these things. And then there's ones that are not sort of, the ones that have contrib at the beginning are mostly official sources. And there's tons of other scripts that are on here that are not official sources that are great, that can work with your workflow. Depending on what you want to do, it basically makes instead of having to do things all the time, you basically set up a configuration file. Once that configuration file is set up, all you have to do is run it, and then all the magic happens. So there's another one of these that's become recently a little bit more popular called Gulp. It's a very similar thing, except for instead of dealing with configuration files, it handles things more in a code-oriented fashion. So you deal with more of byte streams and things like that. It gets a little technical, but you're basically dealing with streams of data and sending them through different functionality to get different results. So it's this idea of code versus configuration, and they both essentially do the same thing, and most of the big projects are supported on both platforms, but it's really preference, like, you know, whether you like to configure things or you like to code things, either way. So Gulp is still the newer kid on the block, so some of the libraries that are out there for Grunt that have been around a little bit longer aren't fully supported or are only partially supported, whatever. So Grunt seems to be a little more stable for me, but if you're on the bleeding edge, Gulp might be for you. That is Gulp.js, but essentially the same stuff. They have a list of plugins that does a lot of the same stuff. So the way that I've used it in the past is, for example, if I have a list of JavaScript files that I want to reduce, right? I have those in my theme. I write a piece of configuration that takes all those, make sure that they're all compilable, the syntax is correct, and then it takes all those, puts them into a single file called site.js or whatever, and then minifies it. It's a minified version, and it makes things a little faster and all that stuff. So I thought we could look at the configuration file that we've developed sort of over time, the different pieces of things that we've found useful, and then talk about sort of how things work and where you might actually use that kind of stuff. Okay, so what we're looking at is, this is on the left, it's a series of files, but essentially I have a single theme that that's going to be for distribution. It's for a client, so it's not something I'm putting up on .org or anything like that, but you know, we've decided to put everything in the theme itself to sort of package it up, so it's not like they have to manage 50 plugins and a theme and get confused and deactivate things. So, so inside your theme, the way we have it set up, there's two files that are important. One is the grunt file.js, and the grunt file is basically where your configuration happens. It's where you take all of your different libraries that you've installed and set up for this project, and it's where you define all the things that you want it to do, and then it will do it once you run that. The other side is this package.json file. So this basically sets up some other configuration options. It has some loose definitions of what you want, but most importantly, it has a set of dependencies that Grunt is going to take to run in this specific case. So here I've included Grunt, which by default you need to have for everything for it to work. Concat, which I talked about pulling files together. Uglify, just kind of compressing JavaScript, things like that. CSS minify will take all your CSS and shrink it all down so it's not so bloated. JS hint is, like I said, the JavaScript watcher to make sure it's good to go. I don't know what node unit. Dave, do you know what that is?
That is a unit test printer.
Yeah, I don't use that. But it's here.
Unit testing is a whole nother
bag
of worms.
So it's something I could possibly be using, but I'm not. I think I'd probably pick that up from some other place. Grunt watch is actually, this is a really handy one for continuous development. It will continue, like, as you make changes and save them in your files, will automatically run all of your grunt commands, so that your CSS gets compiled and then the browser gets reloaded all in one step, so you don't have to do that. Clean and copy and compress kind of go all together. Basically, it takes your whatever folder you're watching, and it gets rid of any cache files. It makes a copy of the folder, and then compress makes it a zip file. So for distribution for us, what this means is that it compiles all of our source, takes a copy of the folder, zips it up, and then you can just upload it into your WordPress admin as a theme file. And it takes the version. It's pretty nifty, but it saves a bunch of steps. Sass does Sass, right? It interprets all the Sass and compiles it into a CSS file. Pot is one that actually we use with WordPress. It does a lot of get text manipulation, so if you're doing lots of translations, this will actually scour your source and actually create translation files for you. That's kind of cool. And then ImageMin is a minification library for images. So if you have a bunch of images that are compressed with Photoshop or whatever, but you really want them to be compressed because Photoshop doesn't compress them that well, this will take it a step further and apply as many different algorithms without losing quality based on your settings to make smaller versions of those files. So all these are the packages that are required in order for my grunt command to work. In order to get grunt to work, there's a very handy getting started set of directions. And so if you walk through this is literally your best bet at getting this to run. If you don't have Node, it will walk you through getting Node. And then npm is basically the Node package manager, which allows you to get all these things. And it does, it kind of walks you through the basics of kind of what I'm talking about. So once you have all these packages set up, it is command line. So it's not something where you're just going to press a button and it's magic. You have to actually run a few commands, and they're yes.
What is that keyword stand?
Okay, so this particular file is going to be a theme, and so the things in here, I probably should talk about that too. The things in here are all related. If you were to search for a theme in a repo, in the WordPress repo, all these things relate to things that go into your style.css header. So all of these things get pulled in my grunt task to update the styles, basically the style file. So they're not necessarily required for just grunt in general, but these ones are ones that we use in our grunt scripts. Okay, so once I have all these packages installed in my system, I go about starting to configure kind of things. So there's a particular workflow or template that you can start from. They have one here that you can basically copy, and then it actually has a lot of what we've already done. So this is the finished one. So you start off with your module exports, and it makes sure that grunt's all set up and everything. And then you start with the config process. So the grunt init config is where you define all of your tasks that you want grunt to run. Below that, you have the package manager things. So these are all the libraries we just went through in the package.json file. You can basically keep them all together. I've broken them up just to kind of keep them separate from my knowledge. So that's loading just all the different tasks that you can possibly run. Then basically, if you just run grunt from the command line by itself, it will run whatever you put in this default command. So I could have it just be, all I want to do is run JS hint, and that's it. But for my basic tasks, I want to check the JavaScript, make sure it's good. I want to concat all the files. I want to make them compressed. We'll do all the SAS and CSS minification. I'm going to compress all the images, and then I'm going to do the translation files. You can register as many tasks as you want. The second one I have is when we're ready to actually release it, we have this build one, which does all the default stuff, plus it creates a zip file and packages it up so that I can just send that off to the client and I can be good to go. Okay, any questions? Yeah?
Is there a task that you could use to like search and find and replace the version number like every time you run the code?
So, yeah, well, okay, so here, one of the things that we have in here is version. So you can have it use anything that you've defined in the package.json. You can actually have it, you can use it here, and so the first thing you do is you actually read in that configuration file here, and then you'll see, like right here, we have, can you guys see that?
Not contrasting enough.
It's not?
Gray and black.
It should be gray and black. It's just a projector.
Yeah.
Let's see here. What's a big contrast do?
Blackboard.
How's that? Any better? Yes? No? Okay. So what I was saying is, for this one, you'll see that PKG just stands for anything in the package file, .title, so that's coming from here. So it's actually putting that header in right here into any of the minified files, and it actually puts in the date or the version or anything that you define in that package file. You can specify to add wherever you want to. Good. You had a question too?
Yeah, I guess when you can't make your JS files into a single JS file,
Yeah.
how does it do that? Do you have to name your JS files in alphabetical order or something like that, or define which ones you can't name first? Sometimes order is important.
That's true. The way that this one works is I have an array of JavaScript files, so it's a hard-coded array. You can specify it to go through and check any JavaScript file and just include it. In that case, I believe it would do alphabetical order. So if it's super important that one goes before another, you'd have to like sort of manage that somehow. Yeah. But I mean, you could just as easily write out.
I see what you're defining. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So if it's really important and you don't have 1,000 JavaScript files, then that should work out. Anything else, real quick? No. Okay. So every one of the tools, the tasks that you have, has a set of configuration options. So let's see. Okay, so each one of those blocks is basically a set of configurations that's specifically for that particular task. So for the grunt pot one, the translation one, it basically needs to know what is your text domain. So what's it going to be looking for in all of your PHP files in the text domain. Does anybody not know about translations in WordPress, the functions for translations?
I just have a question.
Yeah.
So text domains are related to the translation files, and they all have a match. It's kind of like the group that it belongs to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, could you expand the watch section, please?
Yes.
Can we see watch in action?
Yeah.
That's like,
That's the magic.
Yeah.
Is that going to make everybody get it, and then I can go through this stuff? Okay. All right. So, you know what? I might have to import a database real quick.
The watcher is what I think is the awesome thing that Grunt lets you do.
It is, definitely.
But it's not just Grunt. Gulp does it. There are plenty of other build things.
Fail. Sorry, hang on a second. Okay. Okay, so if I just run, so right now I'm in the themes folder on my local system here. So again, you'll see